Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to get started in about 60 seconds, give people time to sign in. So stand by. Okay, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us from around the world. Once again, it's great to have so many aviation professionals gathered to share their knowledge. In our last webinar earlier this month, we considered the overall impact of the COVID-19 emergency on the aviation industry supply chain. Today, we're going to explore what's happening to the training segment and how pilots and technicians are managing to continue learning and what effect the pandemic has had on training operations. We want to be able to address as many of your questions as possible in the time we have. We're going to spend the first 40 or so minutes in open discussion with our panelists, and then we'll put your questions to them. But first, before we get into the discussion, let's start with a short poll for all of you listening to the webinar. We'll keep that poll open for a minute or so please go ahead and answer now. The big question we're asking now is, how has the pandemic affected pilot and maintenance training that either you need or are involved in providing? And the responses are coming in. And we'll show the results here momentarily. Looks like we're up to 63% of you have voted so far. Thank you. And let's take a look at the results now. Interestingly, the majority say they've been able to continue limited training, and the second highest, 29%, are only doing online training at this time. Only 4% are training at normal capacity. 18%, the entire training operation is shut down. Thank you very much for that, Lisa. Now, our expert panelists have an extraordinary array of combined knowledge and experience to share with us, so please allow me to introduce them. Dr. Kenneth Burns is an Assistant Dean of the College of Aviation, Associate Professor of Aeronautical Science, and Chairman of the Flight Training Department at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University's Daytona Beach campus. In his current role as Chairman of the Flight Department, Ken is responsible for leading over 1,200 flight students, more than 200 flight instructors, and 30 mechanics, and more than 50 support members. As the Assistant Dean of the College of Aviation, Ken supports the Dean in leading a college that has approximately 150 faculty and support staff and more than 2,500 students studying 11 different academic programs. Ken holds a PhD in business with a dual specialization in airline management and management of engineering and technology. He also has significant experience as a certified flight instructor and holds an airline transport pilot certificate. Chris Ranganathan, CAE's Chief Learning Officer, who is kind enough to join us in the middle of the night from Australia, is an active pilot, has been involved in pilot training and training management for more than 20 years. In his current role, Chris is responsible for leading CAE's Civil Aviation Strategy team. Immediately prior to joining CAE, Chris was Vice President of Operations Training at Etihad Airways, and he was responsible for introducing evidence-based training on all types and the implementation of the multi-crew pilot license cadet pilot training that used the Embraer Phenom 100 in the basic phase of the program. Chris holds a master's degree in aviation management and is a fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society. Craig Joyner is Senior Vice President of Brand Experience at Fulcrum Labs, and he joined the company because he believed in the company's idea of personalized learning and the potential of Fulcrum's adaptive technology to help any student master course material. In his 6 years at Fulcrum Labs, Craig has helped shape and evolve Fulcrum's process, products, culture, and vision to help the company's clients meet and often exceed their learning goals. Fulcrum Labs specializes in adaptive learning and has worked in the aviation space for the last 7 years, including a collaboration with the Aviation Institute of Maintenance. Now I'm going to ask each of our panelists in that same order to provide a brief summary of how they feel their training operations are performing during the COVID-19 pandemic. Ken, can you start out with Embry-Riddle's situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a university, we were on spring break, or the majority of our students were on spring break in early March, when it became apparent that we were going to have to take some sort of action to mitigate this risk. You know, we began looking at what we need to do to make sure that we didn't spread this virus all over campus as students returned back, and really did risk assessment as we would do for any safety issue that we have within flight through our SMS program. And we came up with ways to mitigate this risk to continue operating initially. The first was building control, making sure that the doors and the way to access, much like you go through TSA, there was really a one-way in, all the exits were open, and we would do wellness checks and wellness protocol on every student and staff member, including what the CDC was recommending at the time as, you know, where have you been on a cruise, that kind of thing. So we analyzed each student and each staff member as they were returning back to campus, and some had to stay away self-quarantine, while others were allowed. Once in the building and in-flight operations, we were doing extreme mitigations, meaning we were on a cleaning cycle, basically hourly, of wiping every surface down, wiping the aircraft down, issuing cleaning supplies to the crews, and providing them on their checklist, what they would need to do in order to clean that airplane or that simulator or that oral room that they were in themselves, even though we were doing it increased as well. Issue gloves, and then strong communication plan about social distancing, you know, removing chairs and computers and making sure everybody's 6 feet apart, that type of thing. So a lot of work went into that. We learned a lot as we were going through that process, and we continued to operate, be it on a reduced scale because some students were not allowed back, and the university, our academic portion, we completely switched to online training by this point. So about a week after spring break, we made that call as a university, and even our 141 ground schools, everything that we teach academically across the university switched to the online format. But we continued the flight training. We continued on that path up until our governor issued the executive order to stay home, the safer at home order. We decided it was probably best if we stopped at that point, in line with what he was asking us to do. During this time, we're still closed at this point, and the order's planning to be lifted here. Actually, we're waiting for word. We're planning to restart operations on May 1st with increased mitigations including the use of masks where social distancing cannot happen, and increase disinfecting and the like. So our online, we learned a lot switching to online. There were a lot of things and processes that we never envisioned that we would do online that we switched, including end of course processes for, completing paperwork and orals and that type of thing. Ground school training, as well as some lab training. We're able to live stream some things from some labs to keep the students engaged and keep working as best we can. And we plan to continue that when we reopen here shortly. Other than that, we're waiting for word here, and we plan to start operations. We sent a poll out to our students as to who plans to return, and about 60% would like to return immediately, and that would be about 600 to 700 students to handle. So we're going to phase that in over the month of May. That's the initial plan here as we go, and continue to teach online to the earliest time. The academics are online until July at the soonest, where we would start a classroom activity. So that's the quick summary here from Embry-Riddle.
Great. Thank you very much, Ken. It sounds like the pandemic has had a fairly big effect on the university.
Yes, yeah, it has. One of the biggest, not one of the biggest, but a concern would be, the students at a university. There's a portion of them that once they go home, they don't come back until the fall semester. And it's important for us to teach these students and to get their certificates and ratings done so that we have room for the incoming class. The numbers thus far for the fall semester look strong, very strong still, as far as the interest in this career path. And that's good because, we believe this is a short-term issue. The pilot shortage was years in the making, and it's not going to end here. It's going to take a breather for a year or two, or possibly 3. But if we're not creating pilots in the interim, when the demand picks back up to the same level, we're going to be in the same boat that we were a few months ago as far as the pilot shortage goes. So the interest continues to be strong, but in order to serve those students, it's really tough to take a month off from training and be able to serve their needs in the fall.
That's an interesting point, and we should discuss how the pilot shortage has changed and what it's going to look like after this is over. Chris, can you summarize what's going on? CAE has a lot of different types of operations, from ab initio training to simulator training centers all over the place. What's going on with CAE's operations now?
Hey Matt, glad to be here. Yeah, in the centers that are open, the protocols we've enforced there are quite similar to the ones Ken talked about at Embry-Riddle. But given the complexity and worldwide distribution of our training network, we've had to deal with many different government travel and local restrictions, and then therefore there's a significant amount of localized decision-making process based on what is allowed, what is not, and above all, what is safe. In many cases, we see regulatory authorities giving temporary relief to our customers' qualifications and currencies. And again, this temporary relief is not always standard, and we've had to adjust to these on an authority by authority basis as requested by our customers. For those customers that cannot travel due to restrictions, and we've received an approval for virtual classroom training. Just like Ken said, we've learned a lot in doing this. We know we've had to modify our existing instructor-led training material to cope with the virtual classroom. Our instructors have had to be trained up to use the tools that are required to deliver instructor-led training material through a video conferencing system. And in general, many of our cadet programs around the globe have retained the capability to train the ground portion remotely. In most cases, maintenance training, for example, has received approval to switch to virtual classroom training. And then we find where customers now have technicians with downtime, they're using that time to send them to refresher training where possible. But many of these approvals are currently considered exceptions by regulators. And this switch to online learning, beg your pardon, has I think it's caught us all by a little bit unprepared. And many of these exemptions have been granted for a limited period only. We've continued to work with authorities worldwide to develop recovery plans, and in some cases provide guidance material, co-developed guidance material. For example, we work with the IATA Pilot Training Task Force to author white papers on the use of competency-based training refresher approach and the use of virtual classroom. And finally, the travel bans have also had an impact on our ability to install and update simulators as previously planned. We continue to innovate, and in some cases, we've done remote installations using IT tools where we use expertise from our plant in Montreal with local hands at the customer facility to continue to install and update simulators. So I guess the general message is it's a mix of being able to adapt to the local conditions and at all times remaining safe for the employee and for the client.
Great, thank you for the summary, Chris. So as I understand it, CAE does offer some online recurrency ground school, but would it be possible, or is this situation forcing you to look at talking to the authorities about extending the ground school capability to initial type rating programs?
Yes, we're doing that in some cases, Matt, and it's again a different approach, a different willingness to go down this road with regulators around the world. We're guided by customer demand, and in many cases, the customers are asking for remote ground school. For example, in many of our cadet pilot programs, for example, in our multi-crew pilot program, we have cadets that have not left their home base, if you like, to travel to our ground school locations, but we've conducted initial theoretical knowledge training at their home base. And what we've noticed is that regulators are coming to the party. They really are stepping up to allow the use of technology, and we see this being a process we will continue to use post-COVID as well, because in some cases it just makes sense, and we're getting better at it.
That's very interesting. So speaking of using technology for training, Craig, tell us what Fulcrum Labs is doing.
Thanks, Matt. We're currently seeing training demand. Mostly, the most dramatic uptick has been for our adaptive learning platform is coming from Title 147 schools, those aviation maintenance schools, and really they're reaching out largely due to our aviation content library, things that we have pre-built, things that prepare students to become certified mechanics, because there's just this immediate need. All these maintenance schools are reaching out. They really need an online learning solution ASAP, to help them support their students during the crisis. Obviously, many of the schools, interestingly enough, have said that they were already thinking of or adding or beefing up their programs with online programs and tools. So we do expect that that's something that will continue after the crisis, especially once they see what those tools can do. But it seems that the urgency of the crisis has just seemed to accelerate the process. And as the crisis drags on, more and more of the schools are citing challenges. I think the most common pinch points are coming from those stopgaps, the simple video lectures. These students in aviation maintenance are used to a more dynamic hands-on training experience, and I think we've all been seeing articles on just sort of a general Zoom fatigue that's creating an engagement drop-off. We're seeing that in a lot of industries. Plus, they're finding it challenging to effectively assess the students' mastery of the material on some of these video conference tools. So these schools have made considerable investments in these programs. Obviously, it's large facilities and equipment and tools, and they want tools that live up to the needs of their students to build their mastery of the material. And they're challenged to help them build their confidence along the way so that they'll be able to apply those skills on the job. And many of the people that we're talking to that running these programs, they're former mechanics. And they take great pride in their jobs, and they really want to deliver on the reputation of their programs that they've worked very, very hard to build. So it's a dramatic situation in terms of them wanting to continue. So in many cases, the demand is coming from new potential partnerships for us, but we've also seen increased demand from existing partners. 4 weeks ago, we helped support our partner, as you mentioned, Aviation Institute of Maintenance. We helped them adapt to the crisis. We've had a 3+ year relationship with them, but the training was really that we were delivering for them was mainly focused on a capstone test prep program. 4 weeks ago, AIM successfully flipped the switch. They're 100% online, all 13 campuses, thousands of students and their instructors are all using our adaptive platform. So we're definitely busier than ever in aviation maintenance school training, and our data science team is thrilled. They love all this new data. It's helping us. We're definitely going to come out of this even stronger than we were, and we anticipate seeing more Zoom fatigue spreading across the industry, especially the longer the social distancing goes on. And we're reaching out to the whole aviation industry, looking to help them provide personalized, engaging, dynamic, competency-based training.
So I think this brings up a good point, though, and it's especially related to the maintenance training. But you know, in all of the aviation training that goes on, there's a certain amount of things that have to be done hands-on, and you know, the FAA requires a certain number of hours of hands-on maintenance activities be done as part of training for the A&P tech mechanic certificate, for example. So can online replace that hands-on training, or is that still going to have to be done at a physical campus? Chris, can you address that one to start with?
Sure, Matt. I think everyone's experience is evolving, and the regulation hasn't envisaged a situation like what we're in here. So in maintenance training, as in pilot training, I mean, there are some tasks that need the manipulation of physical material or controls, and these will still remain in the short term anyway, in the realm of having to physically touch a device or a piece of equipment. We could see the future where VR and AR, particularly in the maintenance training field, help transition some of these tasks into a remote environment. But for today, there are still a significant amount of training tasks that require physical manipulation, and I don't believe in the near term we'll see that we'll move away from that.
I think you're probably right. Craig, are you discussing with customers like the Institute about the hands-on type of training, or is that something that Fulcrum's technology can address? How do you see this situation?
I agree with a lot of what Chris said. You know, we look to the future with AR and VR, and you know, we've designed a platform that can accommodate that. How far will we get? That's going to be a little bit art, a little bit science. It's something that we'll explore with AIM as we move forward. You know, really, the idea is in the crisis, in the immediate, is to make sure that people can move forward, and also that people don't slip backward. You know, sort of losing some of the knowledge that they were accumulating. But we're definitely looking for a future, and I see it as a blended experience. One ideally as it works best, but certainly AR and VR will have the potential to help us push that as far as we possibly can and gain those efficiencies.
I think that will be interesting to see how that plays out. Ken, at Embry-Riddle, one of the problems I imagine is not just figuring out how to help the students, but how do you keep your flight instructors and mechanics and everybody involved in the process current with their skills to make sure that they don't get too rusty while this is happening?
Yeah, that's a good question. It kind of goes back to the online component you were just talking about. You know, we've done a lot in recent years with adding VR type activity into our training environments. We don't get FAA credit for it yet, but as we study these types of things and the skill transfer between, say, a VR environment or AR to an airplane or a sim, we're hoping that we can help the regulators see the value in that. But we've taken advantage of some of that work that we've done previously during this downtime. Specifically, you know, we have a VR lab. We have a different. It supports every degree in the aviation college here, including a pre-flight scenario for pre-flighting a Cessna and being able to bug the aircraft and that kind of thing. But one of the things we've gotten the most value out of during the downturn is our 360 videos. So we have gone out over the past few years and done a lot of 360 video using a 360 camera on the back of an airplane. And then what we did was we flew every maneuver and then we brought it back into our studio and had an experienced instructor voice over different things. So for instance, how to teach maneuvers, what the tricks are to teach different maneuvers, you know, how to help students through those maneuvers and overcome common errors and those types of things. And we've done it, it's basically instructor training after they've been hired. So it's a quality assurance program that we have internally that we put them through because, you know, just because they can fly an airplane doesn't mean that they can get somebody else to. We want to give them as much tools and tricks as possible to be good teachers, and that's even more important with the level of turnover that we were enduring here prior to this shortage, which was about 80% annually of, you know, about 150 flight instructors a year coming through. So to make them better teachers, we've taken that and putting it online. They used to have to go in a room with a VR headset to do that. All of that training is online now. And they've continued to do training like that during this time that we're off. We've also added to that. So we've added to our quality assurance program for flight instructors. And at the same time, you know, we have a very strong group that works on courseware and always improving our courseware for our students and the tools that we give them. And we have instructors working on instructor guidebooks, instructor workbooks, and you know, that type of activity, as well as scripts for lessons and scripts for video lessons. So we're continuing to keep them current with their knowledge through the quality assurance stuff that we put online, but we're also utilizing them during this downtime to advance our courseware as best we can and give us basically stock of a bunch of material that we can then take and employ here through the coming years. So we've kept them busy. Currently, they're trickling in now. We are allowing currency flights. We're just not servicing any students. So they're coming in to get their night currencies in preparation if we do reopen on May 1st as well. And maintenance is here actually full time working on the fleet as well. So that's what we've been doing.
So Ken, for the currency flights, I'm assuming that would just be they're flying by themselves, right?
Correct. So instrument currency, we've been doing it in our flight training devices, and then it's mostly night currency landings that they've been going out and doing by themselves. And we're keeping the numbers low and spreading the activity start times out. So the idea is that people's paths aren't really crossing when they're doing these activities.
And then while they're doing maintenance, I assume they're abiding by social distancing requirements as well, right?
They are, and they're wearing masks as well. So the protocol is still in place for them. They every day they need to get a wellness check. Everybody gets a wellness check for access to buildings, and that includes background as to where you've been in the last 14 days and who you've been in contact with and the like, and a temperature check. And then we issue a different color wristband every day, so we know everybody's been checked and everybody else knows who's been checked. And when they're working on aircrafts, they're maintaining social distance. When they can't, they have their masks on. I'm actually watching them right now out my window. They just pushed a multi-engine aircraft out, and about 5 of them, and they're all wearing their masks, doing that activity.
Great. So, Chris, I wanted to ask you about CAE's policies for helping keep instructors up to speed and current. Are they able to, for example, use the simulators and training devices in their facilities to stay current themselves?
Yes, Matt. For the flight schools, the protocols and the practical application of keeping people current is pretty much as Ken's spoken to. In our simulator centers, the ones that can be accessed, the instructors have access to the training devices, but in many cases where they aren't staying current, it's because there are travel bans in place. So that does prove to be a challenge.
Thank you. So I wanted to just briefly discuss something Ken brought up, and that is we all were aware there was a pilot and technician shortage really building up before the pandemic. And a lot of people are wondering if that is completely over with, or is the situation that a lot of airlines and operators have furloughed or even retired a bunch of pilots and technicians, and when things start to pick up speed again, the shortage might be even worse than it was before. So Chris, is the training industry ready to pick up if things really start to heat up?
I believe the training industry will be ready. And to Ken's point about the pilot shortage pre-COVID, and I think it's not unreasonable to expect there'll be about a 2-year hiatus as we have an oversupply. But the fundamental reasons for the pilot shortage have not gone away, and it would be short-sighted for us not to continue to invest in ab initio pilot training programs. Otherwise, we just kick the can down the road. We will be exactly where we were pre-COVID in about 3 years from now. And when you can imagine that with many air carriers looking at offering early retirements to their most experienced pilots, you could argue that the training demand, in fact, will be greater than it was pre-COVID in about 3 years' time for that reason. So we don't believe that there will be a lasting change to that fundamental problem. It's just a delay of about 3 years.
So people who are just getting into the aviation industry now shouldn't give up on it, should they, Chris?
Without a doubt, it remains a great industry to get into. I think in some cases, I mean, it's always been the case. If you're starting out, for example, as a pilot, timing has been key. Many of us have been at a point in time where you got your first license and then struggled to get that first job, and then somebody who started a few years later than you did just happened to be the right place, the right time, and that will continue to be the case. But we do not expect this to be a lasting effect in terms of primary pilot demand and primary flight training demand.
Ken, are you seeing the same thing? You mentioned about 60% of the students are still involved in some way, but is there still a high level of interest in aviation careers, and is this a good time to stick with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, that 60% was just students that were planning to come back before the fall semester. which is a decent number. We have a significant number of students that don't stay here during the summer semester. But for incoming students and incoming demand, we're actually 25% higher, at least on paper right now, than we've planned for. So we're call campaign to every one of those students. The results are there's still an extremely strong interest. We do expect some of that to dissipate, only because of the possibility that the family can't support that training right now because of possible job issues or something to that effect. But this industry, it has its ups and downs, and this is going to be a downturn for about 2 years. Your guess is as good as mine. But when the demand comes back, it's still a lack of pilots that's out there, unless we continue to make them. My biggest concern is during this lag time with the pilots that we produce, what happens to them. When this has happened previously, after September 11th and the such, you had people go through training, and then when there was no jobs available, they would change careers. And when the jobs do return, it's not always viable for them to jump back into that career. So as long as this is a short downturn, you're gonna see that the interest stays high, the return on investment stays high, and the students want to come and complete that training.
Great, thank you, Ken. So, Craig, since you're involved heavily on the technology side, how do you see the training industry moving forward from where we are right now?
That's a great question. I think first I'd address kind of what Ken and Chris were talking about. And when I look at it and say, it's obviously going to take a little while for this to come back. But if you think about some of the first people to come back, some of the first jobs are going to be those aviation mechanics. They're going to have to prep and get those planes ready. So they're going to be some of the people back on the job the soonest on the front line to really get those planes ready. And they're really in demand now in terms of breaking those planes down, sequestering any of those planes that need to go in storage. So there really is a demand for that now. And I guess we're like everyone else. We talk a lot about what is this crisis going to look like? Obviously, our team doesn't really know what the end will look like or what a resumption will look like. But we've narrowed it down to a few things I'd like to share. These 4 things that we are fairly certain of. And first is that we know that we won't go back to a world that was exactly like it was before the virus. There'll be changes, there'll be new challenges, and some of them will be dramatic. Second, in the aviation industry, everyone from the pilots and mechanics to the stations and warehouse teams, many of these jobs are high stakes, meaning correct application of skills and procedures is going to be necessary to reduce those accidents, keep people safe, avoid regulatory fines, and just generally to have a smooth operation for the customer, which leads me to my third point, which is based on what we've already seen and are continuing to see, the aviation industry, when it restarts, it's going to be under the microscope. There will be intense scrutiny from the media, the FAA, the customers, and even the employees themselves to some degree will be looking to see how we're doing. We don't have a lot of wiggle room or the ability to fake it till we make it. We really need to get it right from the get-go. And that brings us to number 4, which is really training. Training can and will play a key role in all of these 3, either positively or negatively. Training is really the key to a smooth transition for these new challenges, and also what we're calling a re-onboarding of the industry for a really smooth and more successful restart. And for this to happen, like any crisis, we shouldn't wait until we see those signs. Preparedness is key. We need to be doing what we can now. Before any of this crisis, the industry was already short of mechanics, similar to what Ken talked about with pilots. So like Aviation Institute of Maintenance, the way we're looking at it is that we all need to keep our foot on the accelerator, like AIM, to keep those students moving forward, because there's a lot of work out there that needs to be done by the people with the skills and confidence to do it right. It's a very, very high stakes industry. So we should be preparing for the future now. We should preemptively be planning for a commercial aviation restart. We should be talking about what we learned from the crisis. This crisis has definitely shown us a couple things. One, great partners can help each other succeed dramatically more than a vendor type relationship. The crisis has also shown us that some companies, the capabilities of online tools such as Fulcrum's to reduce those costs and more efficiently and effectively get people skilled up. And with training that really adjusts to the individual learner's needs and that provides people with those analytics that predict the likelihood of successful application of skills and shore up any weak areas before people go back on the job. Naturally, the way we see it is as online adaptive learning provider, we're biased, right? But we've seen the results firsthand. Online learning, in our minds, will definitely expand after the crisis, especially learning technology and tools that use artificial intelligence like we do. They'll continue to show their advantages, and the companies who get out in front with this restart with good tools and these outcome-driven partners will be more successful, and they will come out of this much stronger whenever that is.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Craig. Well, that's a good transition to our second poll question. And we'll keep the poll open for a minute. Do you think that pilot and technician training will rebound after the pandemic either ends or decreases substantially? And we'll give you about a minute to answer that question. Looks like some interesting results here. And okay, we've got about 61% voting now. And the majority looks like, here come the results. Majority saying that they believe training centers will be very busy as the industry recovers. And secondly, that training is still going to take a while to recover. But a lot of people still agree that training is important and that this is going to keep training facilities busy. Thank you very much. And now we're just going to go over some of your questions. And so, Chris, I think CAE is with so many far-flung facilities, whether or not customers can travel is going to be a big factor. And do you see that as being somewhat of a pinch point for CAE's training operations?
I guess that's a point of view. In some cases, there's certainly travel restrictions will make it more difficult for some customers to travel to our locations than others. And on the contrary, it is one of our strengths that we have a distributed network of training centers worldwide. So we're almost all of our customers have a regional center they can get to that's perhaps easier to get to in these times than travel across the world to do so. So I believe it's a mix of having travel restrictions stopping you to get from training center and then having access to a training center because we're so distributed.
But once you're in the training center, obviously there are many steps that CAE's people will be taking to ensure that everything is cleaned properly and people are wearing protective equipment, etc.
Yep, Ken brought it up almost right at the start of this webinar. So there are protocols that we've had established in place, including preliminary health screening, temperature checks, questionnaire, and then protocols on for example, the order of people to enter a classroom, exit a classroom, enter in the simulator cockpit, exit a simulator cockpit. There are obviously social distancing in terms of what we've had to do. We were moving, rearranging physical classrooms to accommodate social distancing. We've had make modifications to our briefing and debriefing protocols, and accompany all this with a increased level of sanitization of our training devices and facilities. So when the customer gets to the training center, yep, I guess it's a bit different for many of them from what they've seen before, but all of them understand why we're doing this, and we've had no pushback thus far.
Okay, thank you. And Ken, I'm wondering if you're going to address this question. You know, the sanitary procedures are all good, but it's also been necessary for regulators to look at some training processes and provide some relief. For example, for putting on oxygen masks in a simulator. Do you think that the regulators are going to have to continue to work very closely with the industry to make sure that safety of the participants is held to a high standard?
Yeah, I do. You know, it's we've had a lot of help from the FAA during this time. You know, from our local FSDO all the way up to the head of AFS 800 and AFS 200. Those folks, they understand the gravity of this situation, and they're really going through great strides to provide relief where they can. I expect that to absolutely continue, because you know they don't want anybody to. Obviously they know we need to continue to do what we do to operate, to provide pilots for the industry, as well as to run the business, and they definitely don't want anybody to be unsafe while doing that. So in the name of safety, they've been really fully cooperative on everything that we've asked them thus far. I expect that to continue.
Great. And Craig, in your work with the aviation industry, I know you see that there's going to be changes in the way training is done, but are your partners also seeing that there's going to be changes in the regulatory side of things, as far as what they let the training companies do and what they can do online, for example?
I believe so. You know, the crisis has created a lot of innovation so far, and the longer it goes on, the more chance there will be innovation and more chance for people to try that out. And I think that the FAA, for example, will take a look at that. You know, one of our first projects was doing some A320 training, and it was really the FAA really based that on sort of butts in the seats hours. We were able to show them the platform, and they were able to ease those restrictions in terms of people being able to get through and show them competency and verified mastery of that material without necessarily requiring all those hours.
Great, thank you, Craig. Ken, do you see when actual flight training starts again, that pilots should, like if there's a flight instructor and a student pilot, should they both be wearing masks? And is this compatible with safety requirements, for example, being able to talk on the radio and fly safely?
Yeah, so yes is the answer. So wherever social distancing can happen, we expect a mask to be worn. And our biggest risk for transference here would be in the cockpit of the airplane between those two people. So if they're both wearing masks, that it greatly increases their safety. The masks themselves, thus far, we did a little work on it, but the real proof will be this Friday if we reopen with everyone wearing masks, communicating with air traffic control. There has been no issue with that. I said to somebody this morning, I went to Dunkin' Donuts this morning, and the person on the radio had a mask on, and I can hear him fine. So ATC in the tower is wearing masks as well already. So it seems like there won't be an issue. We didn't fully vet it at full operation, but with the data we have, we don't foresee it being an issue. What we want to study is more of a mask fatigue. There's when you're wearing a mask all day long, what impact does that have on you, and your fatigue level. So we're looking into that as well over the next week or two to figure out. And the other thing is, what are the procedures for wearing masks in office spaces? In public areas, it's a no-brainer. In an office space, do you have to wear your mask if nobody's there? What if somebody comes in? What's the protocol for entering offices? We actually have hold short lines on the floor at every office entrance, and where you have to announce your presence before entering. But we're working on those protocols right now. But I do foresee a mask being worn for the foreseeable future in the cockpit.
I think that's an interesting question. We had a car accident near us here, and the police were saying that the driver's oxygen level was reduced because the driver was wearing a mask, and it must have been a pretty tight-fitting mask. I'm not sure, but it's something to think about.
Absolutely, there's inherent risk in everything we do, so we definitely have to do an assessment to make sure that we're keeping everybody safe.
Exactly. So, Chris, we have a question asking, once we're out of the pandemic situation, there's going to be a big demand for simulator time. Is CAE prepared to get these devices running 24/7?
Absolutely, Matt. That's what we do. Where we've had to reduce capacity due to demand drop off, we've always envisaged being able to spin up again really rapidly to make it happen. And in the case of where we plan to deploy new simulators or update ones that are already in service, and we're able to do a lot of these tasks through partnerships where we can't get our personnel out in the field ourselves. So the short answer is absolutely. I mean, we're always looking to be able to respond quickly, and this particular crisis is no different for us.
Great. Here's a good question. How can other flight schools or colleges utilize some of the best practices that your companies are developing? Is this information available? Are you sharing it with other organizations? Ken, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So yes, it's not fully organized. We have an email chain between aviation universities, UAA type folks, and those that are ABI accredited. And I've shared everything that we're doing. We're going to have a web call tomorrow, actually, and communicate among us all as well. So we're not the experts by far. I'm not an expert on pandemics or viruses. I'm just gonna, we just share everything that we've done, and hopefully when we get our collective brains together, we make it even better as a group. So that's what we've been doing here. And tomorrow we have a conference call with, I think there's about 80 people on it at different universities where we're going to talk some more about it.
And Chris, is this something that CAE has got some best practices that it would share with the industry?
Yeah, I think like Ken said, I mean, none of us is an expert on pandemics, but there's certainly a lot we've learned and that we've begun to share. In particular, in terms of transferring our learning to a virtual classroom, we've spent quite a bit of time and contributed to a white paper that will be released shortly by IATA on best practice and how do you take a traditional instructor-led classroom and move it online. And we know it's not as simple as just giving them a subscription to Zoom or Teams or something else. There's lessons to be learned from industry that have been doing this for quite some time in corporate learning and development that we've tapped into and sought to adapt. So we are doing our part in sharing our experience, and we'll continue to do so.
Thank you, Chris. So, Craig, that transitions to another question that kind of addresses what Chris was talking about too. But question is, does classroom training have a place in future aviation training? And are we learning that online training is going to replace some classroom training, or what are you seeing, Craig?
Yeah, it absolutely will. There are definitely certain cases where online training is the great entire replacement for things, and in some cases it really is just it's just a different. What the online is changing is the blend, right? Whereas maybe before something was just some materials were distributed online, 5% of the course and 95% was done in person. We're just seeing that line push further and further. And again, each case is very specific to its needs. In some cases, it really makes sense to do some component in person where there's great value in it. So it's just, again, we're in the figuring out stage, but certainly there's a lot of impact from blended learning. And what our tools, the digital tools, sometimes can do is it can just make that blended experience more efficient. So instead of students coming into a classroom and the instructor spending time figuring out what do these people know and don't know, students can do something online. The instructor before the class can look at the analytics, can really see both individually and as a group, where are the holes? Where should I spend more time? And conversely, once the instructor has done something in the classroom, the online tools can be used to assess how well students really absorb that, how much they're retaining it, and it can also be used as a spaced repetition. So the in-class is really delivering something, and the online portion gives a chance to give that space or that sort of a memory booster by pinging people on that information. It really helps make it stickier and helps them retain it more, and confirms for the instructor in the in-class that all the material is retained and likely to be applied back on the job.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Craig. Well, we're coming up on our time limit, and that's all we have time for today. On behalf of AIN's global audience, I'd like to thank our excellent panelists for their valuable time and for sharing their wisdom. Thank you to all of you who have joined us for this webinar. And if we didn't get to your question, then we'll try to follow up with a constructive answer later. And this webinar and all our other webinars are recorded and they're available for later viewing on our website at ainonline.com. Thank you all for getting together with us, and thank you, Ken, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Craig. Please take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.